Let's start with the largest generic pharmaceutical company in the world, and that is Teva Pharmaceutical. It's in fact bills itself as the largest, and it is in fact also Israel's largest company. So it's kind of like the Anglo-American of Israel. It emerged over quite a few decades and grew. It's had a bit of a tough time recently. It's down to a market cap of about $31 billion. That I can tell you because it's listed in Tel Aviv, but it's also listed on the New York Stock Exchange as an ADR and traded fairly actively there. So at some point it was a lot higher. We'll have a look at that in a minute. The price to earnings ratio is coming up on these systems now anyway is very high, reflecting maybe a bit of earnings volume volatility, but a high dividend yield. So just give us an overview of what's in there under the hood, which drugs they have. I think they also have one or two specialty research-based drugs that are in patent.
Correct. So the biggest one of those is Copaxone. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I'm not a doctor.
That's what I've
Yes, which is a multiple sclerosis drug, and they've owned this for more than 20 years. They bought it from a research institute in Israel, and that has been a real profit driver of theirs, where even after a lot of M&A activity, it's probably roughly a third of profits and 20% of the top line.
They got genericized by a competitor, even though that's what they do, is run after people trying to chomp their patents.
Yes. So one of the themes in the sector is M&A. And as they saw the end of the life of Copaxone, they started buying a lot of generic companies and try to get a lot of those and consolidate the market share and keep the pricing high. And they are one of the companies that are always fingered when the US comes to these pricing investigations. There have been some fines. Teva has been found guilty, and there's even more investigations going on. So unfortunately, because they are used to these extremely high margins from the specialty drugs, they try to transpose this business model to the generic market. And sometimes they've been a bit naughty in that, and they've been caught out.
Let's have a look at the share chart, because when I say they were at an all-time high of around $70, you'll see that there, and they're currently trading at around 30. Ironically, I used to own this stock because in about sort of the period around 2005, 2006, when we were first looking at US and offshore things, the whole attraction of generic pharma then led us to Teva, as you say, the world's largest. They didn't do all that well. They did a couple of acquisitions, as you said, of Bar and Ratio Farm and all sorts of other things. Copaxone was always an issue, though. You could see that's where they were making a lot of the money. And then the generic stuff was kind of a follow-through. I just want to ask you one other question. I'm giving the impression that drugs have 20 years and then they go off patent, but it's sometimes a bit more complicated than that. They get extensions, they change the formulary, they change the way that the drugs get taken, they try to extend the patent protection, which makes then for quite a complex FDA tussle over whether or not the generic drug can be sold.
Correct. So the Food and Drug Administration in the US needs to approve any drugs before they are sold. And when it comes to near the end of the patent term, a lot of these companies try to create new formulations and then they say, no, this is a new drug. I want the new patent for another 20 years.
I want an extension.
But on the other side, a lot of generics companies try to do the fast track process, where if it's the generic based on the same formulation as other companies, they say, well, it's the same thing. So please, the FDA, improve this very quickly, that we can get into the market very quickly. And that's what puts pressure on the price of the branded original drug. So we've seen actually more of that. The fast-track drugs come into the market, which has led to the last 2 years, a lot of pricing pressure on these generic drugs.
Okay, so I mean, Teva is very big in Israel. Obviously, that's just sort of its base, but it's really a global corporation. After it bought Ivax, that was the other company that I was thinking of.
And Activist is actually the latest one, which is roughly near the high of the share price, $40 billion, huge acquisition, and they've had indigestion in the last year and a half since that.
So you're saying Teva bought Activist in its entirety, or a piece of it?
No, just the generic business of Activist. So Allergan bought Activist, and then Allergan decided, well, they'll focus on speciality, Botox, and a few other things, and they sell the big generic business to
high debt
Teva.
Is what you're talking about, and you said was a concern. So hot or not on Teva at the moment?
Well, we'll see this throughout the show, that because the generic companies have been so active, so much in M&A, high debt levels with the expectation they can keep prices high, and that hasn't happened. They now got lower earnings and higher debt levels, high interest expense. Teva is a case of this. Plus, they don't have a permanent CEO at the
been high turnover also in the CEO office.
Yes, CFO also left a few weeks ago. So a lot of uncertainty, and even at this price, quite a low price with the high debt levels, I would say not hot.
Okay, we're going to pass. All right, I'll take your lead on that. Let's